I am Halli Casser-Jayne, and welcome to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. We're along with my partner in politics, former White House correspondent Matthew Cooper. We slice and dice all things politics, and some days Donald Trump, too. This week on the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, we take a look at the power of women in Congress with veteran New York Times Capitol Hill reporter Jennifer Steinhauer, whose new book, The First, The Inside Story of the Women Reshaping Congress, is a must-read. The podcast is posted at HalliCasserJayne.com and is available on all your favorite apps. Let's get started. We begin with Matthew Cooper and our weekly take on the political scene. Here we go. Okay, Mr. Matthew, we begin with confirmed about 62,000 deaths, 3.8 million more filed for jobless claims, and admit it, Republicans are willing to let people die to boost their chances in the election. Huh? Welcome to the world. Nothing there.
Yeah, I'm still processing that.
That's a lot to process. It's so depressing, isn't it?
They're letting people die to improve their chances. How do you figure?
To improve their chances? To win. First, the government sets up criteria for opening up states. Every state that's opened has not met those criteria. They're talking sending people back to work, even though they know what's going to happen. They made a decision.
But you're saying that makes them more popular.
No, who makes who more popular?
You say you seem to be implying that Republican governors who ease lockdown restrictions are doing it to make themselves more popular. But why do you think...
you're missing the point. They think if the economy comes back, they're pushing the economy. That if the economy comes back, that's their chance to win the election.
Right, but you said more deaths would make them more popular.
Well, not more. Well, it effectively gets to that, doesn't it? Because if the bottom line becomes you're making a decision here. And people don't think in terms of the deaths because you and I have both discussed this. It's obscure. We don't see body bags. They don't really show us the hospitals. You know, you may not know somebody, but somebody else may know 10 people. If you're out in the heartland of America right at this point, you probably don't know, although it is coming. So, yes, I believe that they've made a draconian choice here. If we save the economy, it's the economy's stupid. And they'll sacrifice some lives for the economy, and that's that. You don't agree?
No, I just didn't think it was necessarily going to make them more popular or that they were calculating that more deaths equaled more popularity. But now I think I follow you.
Yeah, I think you're the one who said the word popular. I don't remember saying that. I said that they're willing to let people die to boost their chances in the election. Deaths. Right.
You said that they were allowing or even encouraging more people to die in order to win elections.
Yeah.
But now I think I follow your logic here. Okay.
Yeah, and it's a measure of where we are today in this country. You know, what's right, what's wrong, what's important, what's not. I despise who we're becoming. This isn't how the world that I was raised in. Was it the world you were raised in?
This is a different world. Absolutely.
And it leaves me speechless, which is pretty hard to do. But what are your thoughts on this? You think they're right?
I would follow the science. I mean, I don't think Wyoming necessarily has to have the same restriction policies as New York City. It sounds like the Georgia governor was far too loose. But I think the basic guidelines of how to loosen up are probably make some sense. And, we'll see what happens. But yeah, do I think it was reckless of the South Dakota governor not to, do a lockdown in Sioux Falls or for the Georgia governor to do what he's doing? Yeah, sure. I do. I agree with you.
Yeah, it's interesting to me. Yesterday, good old Ron DeSantis has decided he's going to open up the state, not the first 4 low counties, the southern counties. Here's the deal, Matt. The virus doesn't know the difference between Palm Beach and the Treasure Coast. And this is 95 is a very fluid road, and people go up and down this road all the time. So excuse me, we're gonna keep it shut down, where the rich people live and the rest of the state. I gotta tell you what, in my county, the numbers are up every day. Every day. And of course, the other thing is, let's get back to draconian. Ron DeSantis has stopped the medical examiner from releasing the stats on COVID.
You mean in terms of regional and racial breakdown?
Period. Nothing's coming out of the medical examiner's office. Shut down. Now, there have been, the Miami Herald and a couple of the other papers are suing him because he hasn't been disclosing the numbers. I think that's so interesting. Now, for a week, they told the medical examiner, you cannot release the stats. The medical examiner has been about 20% ahead of the numbers, larger than the numbers that the government has put out. Meaning DeSantis has put out. Such ugliness is going on here. And let's go further with it. How about what's going on with the meat plants? Telling people, mostly immigrants, by the way, who were scared of their jobs anyway, you're going back. And if you don't go, that means you quit and you don't get unemployment insurance, but everybody's dead in the meat plant and there are no tests. Surely you have something to say about that.
Yeah, no, I mentioned the South Dakota governor. Obviously, the meat plants is a horrible situation, and Trump's decision to finally invoke the Defense Act in order to produce bacon instead of masks or ventilators seems loopy beyond belief. It is. I think we're learning a lot about the food chain in this country.
Yeah.
Look, I'm not disagreeing that this, that the policies of this administration or of these Republican governors who seem to be opening too early are bad.
So let me tell you something. I don't know if you're aware of this, but Germany opened up. And they're about to shut down again because the numbers went through the roof. Hello. You would think that somebody would learn from everybody else's mistakes. I mean, it was funny this morning. Trump was talking about Finland and how, everybody's dropping dead there because they didn't do what he did. And yet he's out there telling everybody, open up the system.
Yeah, Sweden, right.
Sweden and Finland. Finland.
Sweden and Finland.
Yeah.
Okay.
But how ironic. He's tweeting and saying those idiots didn't do what we did and look what's happening to them. And now he's doing what they did.
Well, that's Trump. No, I totally agree. Well,
where does that put us as a nation? Because I think at some point we get into, it becomes a moral argument or a moral discussion. Because what do we wind up as a nation at the end of all of this? Yeah.
Well, I agree mostly. I think, look, I don't think even the strictest shutdown advocates are going to argue for maximalist shutdown indefinitely. At some point there's going to be an opening up and a risk of increased deaths. Now, I think from everything I read, and I'm not an epidemiologist, but from everything I read, that sounds like, that should take place much farther in the future for pretty much everywhere, including and especially the hardest hit states. But at some point there's going to be a calculation about whether it's worth risking more lives in order to open up the economy.
Okay, you're right. Yes. So let me throw this at you. So they set up criteria for stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. And then they completely threw all of that criteria away and are starting to open up. No testing. None of the steps that you had to do, to find out who the tracing. That's what Fauci and Dr. Birx both said. If you can open it,
right.
But you got to follow these rules, and they're not following the rules.
Well, they being the governors, right?
No, they being Trump, because Trump had DeSantis in his in the Oval with him to give him cover to do this because he wants to do it in the states that are important for him to win. He's,
Yeah. Well, I know what you're saying. It's a gamble on their part to assume that A, the economy really will rebound if you open up, or B, that people will go out even if they're permitted to. and see that people won't be alarmed by any subsequent rise in deaths. I mean, I know what you're saying, but I think you'd agree it's a, even if you acknowledge their cynicism, you'd have to agree it's a somewhat risky bet on their part.
Betting lives against an economy, bad bet, number one. Draconian bet, venal, call it what you will. That must be discussed. That's number one. And number two, bad bet. You know, Trump doesn't think like you and I do. There is no bet for him. He sees it his way, and he's going to do it his way, and he's going to barrel it through. And you know, if it doesn't work, he'll figure out a way to spin it so it will work. That's how he rolls.
Right. No,
yeah. You know what I'm saying.
I know what you're saying. Okay.
Okay. So, I do want to take a pulse on this. How's your life? How is it in Washington? Tell me what's going on there? People still adhering? Do you starting to get frustration? What are you reporting from DC?
Well, I think it's like a lot of the Northeast. I think it's, you know, people are still in the more, you know, extreme lockdown with, you know, restaurants, bars, everything pretty much closed except for supermarkets, gas stations, and a couple of other things. People are pretty much abiding by the social distancing. They're either staying in, or when they're out, they're wearing masks and staying more than 6 feet away. So in general, I think there's been a fair amount of compliance. Now, DC's numbers are still going up, and they expect our crest not to come for another few weeks. So, you know, I think we're in it for a while here. But, you know, I think overall you have to be sort of, you know, impressed at least that sort of, you know, all essential services are kind of working. You know, the grocery stores are pretty full. The power's on, the water's on, the internet's on. So, you know, I think it's bad, but it's not like at the breaking point.
Okay. Personally,
and you?
Me? Well, you know, it's Florida.
Well, are you getting a tattoo? I mean, you know, how Florida is it?
No tattoos for Miss Halli. No, it's, I did go out.
Tanning parlors? I mean,
I went to the supermarket, and I discovered when I got there that some people wear masks, most don't. People were in your space. They were not prohibiting the amount of people who were going in. If you said to somebody, "You're too close to me," they got irate. It's like, you know, go water in. I think somebody said to me, you know, it's just, you know, it's crazy down here. You know, people are crazy, and they're old people who are the ones who are the most vulnerable, which is, I find so amusing. You know, I have spoken to friends in the last 24 hours who say, I don't care what the stupid governor says, I'm not going out. And he's going to have to show me some better numbers, and he's going to show me that I can get a test if I decide to go, you know, to my local pharmacy to get a test. Because right now, I can't get a test.
Right.
You know, complete distrust of DeSantis. Complete distrust. Marco Rubio is being treated like he's like some kind of, and don't ask what people are saying about Rick Scott, because the other thing down here is you cannot get unemployment insurance. You're entitled to it, but you can't get it. Because when Scott was in, he made the conditions so tough because he wanted to show that, you know, his budget was in balance. Those rules are still in place. DeSantis hasn't fixed it, and it's a mess down here. That's Florida for you. So we'll see what happens on Monday when the state, quote unquote, some of the states to open up. Now, you're allowed to have 25% people in a restaurant. The restaurateurs that I spoke to said we can't open under those conditions because we can't afford it. It'll cost us more money than money will be coming in. So we'll see what happens. It's all rather strange. We move on because we can't solve this problem, obviously. Election 2020. So polls, interesting, Matt. Biden doing pretty darn well under, you know, even down here, he's ahead 3%. We begin the morning with Trump going ballistic against his campaign manager, Brad Parscale, and his great fundraiser, and she does do that. I call her Cupcake Ronna McDaniels. What are you thinking?
I love your nicknames for everyone.
Yeah.
Well, look, I think a normal president would be popular now as he rallied the nation. But, this guy, not so much. Look, sure, at the moment, I do think, I think the Democrats are in good shape for Biden and the congressional seats. But, goes without saying, it's, the end of April, at least 6 months away, and closer to 7, and, we're going to see.
The operative is...
But, I think...
Good.
I don't know what the world's going to look like in November. If it looks like this, Trump's going to lose.
Yeah. Well, that's the other interesting part about him taking, quote unquote, the gamble you talked about, because he's inviting this thing to stick around through November and to get worse. Fauci is very clear that he thinks it's going to be a second wave, combined with the flu. Everybody's going to be dropping.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I guess, you can look at it from a multitude of points of view as to what are your choices. There aren't many. But I want to go back to Biden, and I think it's fascinating what's happening here. This is going to be an election that, of course, will be written up for a multitude of reasons. But the guy who couldn't get himself arrested is now beating Trump, and he's not even out there, Matt. Biden who?
I think that's kind of the explanation, right? The fact he's not out there means it's all about Trump right now. So Biden is essentially, what they call generic Democrat in polling. And I think he's, as long as it's about Trump, Biden's going to win. If it's Trump versus Biden, or if it's about Biden, then it's a little dicier.
It's interesting, isn't it? And let's talk about this.
Yeah.
Here's a subject that I have been very remiss about discussing. And that's the sexual harassment charges by Tara Reade. I say that because I'm not a big fan of the Me Too movement, because although I understand the concept of it, it's very black and white. You're guilty or you're not. And without any judging or, no courts of law, somebody says it enough times, you're guilty. And along comes this Tara Reade, and the story is just bizarre and very unbelievable to me on many levels. But the press's handling of it has been interesting to me, because nobody knows where to go with it. But
right.
Biden has even been interesting in that he's banking on the news cycle to change and to move on quickly, so he's silent. And the Democrats, women, some Democrat, obviously not all, because the people who are up for vice president are certainly staying with him, are pushing it. And what are your thoughts? It's an interesting story.
Yeah, I think it is. Well, I think that the New York Times and some other places have done their, they don't want to be seen as ignoring a charge like this. So they've kind of done their kind of dutiful investigation story into it. And they basically, cut it off at one piece for now. The Washington Post editorial page did insist today that Biden needs to personally respond to this.
Yeah.
I think he's probably played it right so far to, deny it. Her claims do seem dubious. There are a lot of questions about her story. So, I think Biden, assuming it's not true, which is kind of where I would be, then I think he's done, probably the right thing so far. At some point, he'll get thrown a question at it if he's out in public ever again. And he'll probably have to say something on camera. And, he can deny it then. But I think, I think there's going to be a lot of efforts to tar Biden.
Sure.
Between now, the Hunter Biden stuff was just the beginning, and now this, and there's going to be everything between now and then. So, get ready for this. I think Trump's best chance is to really, dirty up Biden. And this is...
But you could say this. You could say that Biden is Teflon, too. He's got such people just love this guy at this point. He's just lovable. And I don't see anybody breaking through that. I mean, people are kind of like, if this were my son and they went after my hunter, I'd kill him. If 20 allegations against Trump on sexual harassment, how dare you go after a man who's had a career that spanned whatever, and nobody brought any charges up against him, even the years he was vice president until now. There may be a Teflon quality to Biden, and particularly if they remain good at what they're doing right now, which is keeping him, on the throne in silence. I do think I want to say this. I've noticed with the media that what they're doing is those that are addressing the story of Tara Reade are addressing the story of one Tara Reade. And I don't think it's fair to do that unless you at the same time put a comma. Let us also remember that president, when he was running for election the first time, was, charged by 20 women, and there are lawsuits that are pending and whatever. And he's got a guy in jail for trying to cover up his affairs. So, meaning Michael Cohen, who I understand is getting out. But, okay, I think that's something. And I'm bringing that up because I want to bring something else up. So now we have a new person, Justin Amash, former Republican, only Republican to vote for impeachment, who is now, begun an exploratory committee into running for president as a
the Libertarian
Thank
Party.
you, my brain just stopped. And immediately Chuck Todd got him on his show yesterday. Now, first of all, F you, Justin Amash. Sorry. Because I just don't think anybody in their right minds at this point wants to do anything to keep Trump in office. And if he knew that Trump was so bad, he has to know that if he runs, he's going to be pulling votes, not from Biden, but he's going to be pulling them from Trump. That's number one. And number two is, you and I know who Justin Amash is. And maybe the people in his, hometown in Minnesota? Michigan, yeah. Matt, nobody else knows who he is. Why give him any ink until he proves something of himself? This is the same thing they did to Trump. They gave a guy who shouldn't have gotten any press for running press. Talk to me.
Well, I mean, he's gotten some stories the last day, but I don't think it's been, I don't think it's exactly pushed coronavirus out of the news. I mean, he's gotten some ink, but look, I don't know who he'll draw votes from in the end.
You don't?
We do know that third parties tend to, collapse. And I tend to think he's not going to be much of a difference.
No, they never win. That's not the point. They just
I didn't say they win.
They take votes.
Yeah, but often not a determinative amount of votes.
Well, in an election like this, where it could be very, very close.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We don't know yet, and we'll find out. But it was inevitable, one or two independent candidates would get in that bear scrutiny.
Yeah, I don't think this guy bears scrutiny yet. Let's see what happens. I want to bring up Stacey Abrams. How are you feeling about her going out there and unabashedly lobbying for the Veep role?
Well, it's it's a little unusual because mostly the sort of standard line is, I'm focused on the people of Montana. I'm not even going to answer that question. So, I think her and Elizabeth Warren and some others, I'm sure will, are going to be more vocal in their campaigning for it. And, I'm not sure that's a bad thing. People might as well be honest about their ambitions rather than feigning modesty.
Yeah. Kind of turns me off a lot. I don't know why. Yeah, but it does. It totally turns me off. Lindsey Graham lost a big donor today. Yesterday, his Democratic rival was actually ahead a little bit. This morning, Cook called it for Lindsey where it is. But it's a very tight race down there in South Carolina. What you thinking about that?
Well, I think it shows the degree to which, Republicans are are in trouble, but I think the dynamics and such are still kind of favor Graham, as the Cook Political report said. But this guy's, I'm sorry, his name is escaping me, but he's a pretty good challenger. He's getting a lot of money. He's going to give Graham his toughest race since 2002 when he was elected to the Senate. So, it's going to be worth, keeping in mind.
I actually think Graham can lose. I
agree. Yeah.
And what's really interesting about it is if they can get, if Nancy Pelosi can pull what I think she wants to pull on this, write-in voting, mail-in voting, and they do it in South Carolina, Graham will not win. The black man will win. Because one of the big problems down there is you can't get a lot of the poorer blacks who would like to vote out to vote. So I think that's going to change things a lot if you can get that mail-in voting thing going, particularly if the stamps are already on the envelope.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. That's a good point.
So you can see why the Republicans are working so damn hard not to allow it. Now, what's the story with Kim Jong-un? Do you have anything on
that? Yes, my deep sourcing in Pyongyang tells me.
Isn't that a weird story?
It is a weird story because it's North Korea. You don't know if he's in hiding because he's a germaphobe or if he's a vegetable.
Oh my God. That's a sentence of all time.
I mean, I don't really have a good sense of what's going on, to be honest, Halli. It's one more serious variable in what's going on in the world.
It's so crazy. It's beyond belief. So is the Mike Flynn story, which, geez. Listen to me. I'm fumfering over this story because it seems Trump is doing everything in his power to free Flynn, which means Flynn's got something unbelievable on Trump. They've done everything in their power to overturn what's gone on this thing. This morning, he's tweeting about former FBI Director Comey. Right. He said Comey did it. I said, well, no, Mike Flynn did it. He admitted it. I mean, come on.
Right. I mean, well, Trump's been lobbying, as part of the issue with impeachment, and was that Trump was lobbying Comey from the get-go to, go easy on Flynn. So
there's
I don't know. We could be barreling towards a pardon soon. I don't know.
Oh, Roger Stone. That's another crazy story that's out there. I mean, geez. I mean, he gets crazier by the minute. But I always say with Roger Stone, you got to be careful because everybody says Roger Stone talked to Julian Assange more than people realized. Not Roger Stone. Trump. He was working for Trump, right?
Right. As right. Trump's proxy.
Right. Need to make that point square. Okay. We come to the end of our short show. Baseball may come back. Oh, would that be lovely in any form? Just to hear the crack of the bat. Take me out to the ball game.
Yeah, that's all you're going to hear. Right? No fans.
No fans. But, you could do like what Bill Maher does. Puts the laugh track behind him. So you
right.
could...
You
could produce it, yeah.
You could totally produce it.
Right.
I think you have a second career.
There you go. I'd love to do it. Hey, Matt, we end on this.
Halli. Could be.
Oh, I haven't heard that in weeks. Thank you for that. I needed that. Steve Bullock is ahead in Montana, 49-46 over the Republican Danes. Go, Steve!
Your boyfriend's doing great.
He's doing great. Although I don't really want him to come to Congress.
Well, you don't want him to retire to his ranch or whatever he does. So,
no, it's just that, I don't want him to get caught up in that ugly there and stay there forever and a day because, but we'll see. Somebody will be wearing cowboy boots, and that's a good thing. That's totally a good thing. All right. Stay safe, my friend. Talk to you soon. Bye. Bye. You were listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts weekly at hallicasserjayne.com and is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Be sure to find us on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, and all your favorite apps. You can find the Halli Casser-Jayne Show on your Alexa device, too. Just say, the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. Oh, and come play with me on Twitter at the Halli CJ Show. Consider this. In January 2019, the largest number of women ever elected to Congress was sworn in, 87 in the House and 23 in the Senate. This history-making class of 2019 included many remarkable firsts. The youngest woman ever to serve, the first 2 Muslim women, the first 2 Native American women, 1 openly gay, a black woman from a nearly all-white Chicago suburb, and a Hispanic woman from a heavily Republican border region. In many instances, these were the first women and or persons of color and or youngest persons to serve from their state or district. 1 is the oldest to be elected. The story of this transitional moment has been chronicled by veteran New York Times Capitol Hill reporter Jennifer Steinhauer, who has been following this historic transition from day one, and she reports the story in her new book, The First, The Inside Story of the Women Reshaping Congress, a dizzying ride into what makes a congresswoman and how they navigate that ride. Let's talk with Jennifer Steinhauer. Jennifer, first let me say thank you for being here. It's so nice to have you here. As I told you off air, this is informative and fun, and we all need fun right now and informative. So thanks for some wonderful writing. It really is quite a book.
Thank you.
You're quite welcome. Let's begin with this. It's 2020, and according to the U.S. Census Bureau, there are 161 million females in the U.S. as of 2013 versus 156.1 million males, or about a ratio of 1 to 1. I think nationally females make up something a little bit more than 50% of the population, but that percentage varies across states. In fact, and I looked this up, women outnumber men in all but 9 states. How do you like those numbers? Approximately 100 years after we finally got the vote, here we are. Is the current ratio of men to women in Congress fair? What?
Well, I mean, how can you say that it is, right? It's not even 25%. I mean, it's interesting because when I was interviewing Pat Schroeder, who is long retired, lives in Florida, but, she was a groundbreaking congresswoman from the state of Colorado in the 70s, one of the big names. And I called her up and I said, "Oh, Congresswoman, I want to talk to you for my book." And she said, "Well, I don't know what you're so excited about. It's not even 25%. So I understood it from her point of view. But, we have to look at the fact that it's still a record in the history of our nation. And we have to, I think, kind of take apart what that means and what the future is from there.
It's funny that you mentioned Pat Schroeder because she came to life when I sort of came to life. But I remember when Emily's List started, it was 17%, just about the time that Pat got in, and here we are. So progress is slow. What can you say? But it's annoying to me. Is it annoying to you? It's really annoying.
Well, I do. I think it is annoying. Listen, there's a lot of ways that it's annoying to be a woman in the workplace, and being in the minority all the time in top levels is certainly in of itself its own problem. I mean, look, women in some ways, not all ways, not majority ways, in some ways have been their own worst enemy when it comes to public office, because unlike men who look in the mirror and say, "Hey, I see a congressman, or I see a mayor, or I see, even a city councilman," women usually, it's getting better, but women usually have to be talked into running, So women sometimes have not historically felt like men so comfortable with putting themselves in that arena and stepping up and daring themselves to serve and to raise money, which is not fun. And women, often don't like that very much either. And then they face, obviously, the different obstacles, particularly in primaries, that we know about, in terms of people, some voters in some communities just frankly not being willing to vote for women. That's mostly true in primaries. In general elections, women run at the same rate as men. So they have to run, they have to get through their primaries, and obviously then they have to win. And we see a record in Congress as pathetic as 25, not even 25% maybe. We're seeing it in state legislatures. You mentioned majority women. The state of Nevada has a slightly majority female legislature now, first and only in the country. And that's made a difference. So, women are getting there in elected office, but they do need to start off and they need to run for things, especially even at the lower levels, because that's the bench for, higher federal office holding.
Talk to me about this. Talk to me about you, because I'm always fascinated by the women journalists, which is what I am. And I can remember back in the day when I started, I was down in Salvador and I was the only woman there. Right? We've come a long way, baby, in our field. Thank God. But tell us about you, because, you're in the halls of Congress. You've seen it all, and you've written a great book. Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, my career is kind of funny because I'm was the last of those really old school programs, pathways into journalism. I always like to say, and I really mean it, that the first third of my career was one long, possible HR complaint, because the kind of stuff that young people, and particularly women, went through in those days would just not be accepted in the workplace. Now people would be shocked, but it was just so commonplace. I was a college student in New York City working as a copy girl at the New York Times, and we literally answered to that name, the guys and the gals. We answered to the name copy. Someone would yell across the room, copy, and you'd run over and see what they needed and, take something from here to there. All the stuff that's kind of automated now, and you're running personal errands and you get yelled at all the time. And the dreaded errand that I would have when the press room was in the newsroom was to go down at night and get the first editions of the newspapers, because that was just like cat call central. I was a 20-year-old college student and there were these old pressmen down there. And that was just the culture of newsrooms. That's just how it was. And you accepted that or you didn't, you could find another job. I mean, you know that. So anyway, worked in clerical positions for a long, long time. Finally started writing. In those days, you didn't even get a byline, and worked my way up to finally become a reporter trainee, and then a full-fledged reporter. I started in Brooklyn for a little bit, style section, worked in the business section, worked for the Metro desk, was City Hall bureau chief around 9/11, that period. Then I was in Los Angeles. I took a year off to cover Katrina, and I came to Washington in 2010, and that was when it was pretty clear Republicans were going to take over Congress, which they did. And that was kind of the Tea Party revolution. And my main job was to cover these 87 new freshmen who had come in again and taken the gavel from Nancy Pelosi and was having sort of their own little revolution. And the question then was, were they going to change Washington, or was Washington going to change them? And I think we kind of saw that answer as the Tea Party movement eventually morphed into Trumpism and the populism. And I think it's fair to say the party's been, at this moment in time, has become the party of Donald Trump. And so you fast forward to 2018, after the election of Donald Trump 2 years later, and you have a large number of Democrats, most of them women, who challenge sometimes Democrats in their own district, but more often sitting Republicans. They were kind of the answer, the bookend, if you will, to that period. And obviously won in big numbers and helped the Democrats take back the House. But it's a diverse group of women in many ways, as you know this because you read my book, that it's not just the far left sometimes gets a lot of attention. It was a moderate women across the political spectrum, across all kinds of professional backgrounds, race, religion. Many of them were the first of their kind for their district. In some cases for the nation, like the two first Native American women, the two first Muslim women to serve in Congress. So it was really kind of an answer back, if you will, to the 2016 election. That's where we're at. And 2020, I suppose, will adjudicate that. We are going to see more women run on both sides of the aisle. As you know, Republican women lost ground in 2018. They've been losing ground for a while now in Congress. So it's very interesting to see sort of the politics of this moment evolve with women really leading that.
See, I think you have a very unique perspective on it, because when I was looking at your career, I said, she gets it, because you did exactly within the realms of journalism what these women are doing in the realms of government. Let's throw out some names for those who may not know, but mostly do. Rashida Tlaib, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, sure. Deb Haaland, Abigail Spanberger, Ilhan Omar, Kirsten Sinema, Katie Porter will talk about, Donna Shalala, who I've known forever. Oldest woman to come in. Don't you just love it? But it's such an interesting group. And yes, they are all the far left pretty much. And it did move to the left. And I loved your telling us about, they're the answer to the Tea Party. It's morphed into Trumpism. And I think that's interesting in and of itself. But there really are a lot of firsts here. The title of the book, the firsts. Let's look at some of these women. And when you're doing that, talk to me about the fact that Republican women what, 1, 2? It's kind of odd. But
yeah, only one Republican woman prevailed in 2018. Yes, a lot of firsts. So the most obvious ones, as we mentioned before, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. You mentioned 2 Muslim women first to serve in Congress. You mentioned Deb Haaland and Sharice Davids in Kansas, the first 2 Native American women to win and serve in Congress. And, what's really interesting to me about the 2 of them, and I spent a lot of time with them, particularly Sharice Davids, I spent time in her district in Kansas City, Kansas. They are different tribes. They are different generations. Deb's quite a bit older than Sharice. Very different districts. Deb's is a pretty liberal district in New Mexico. Sharice Davids took out a Republican in what had historically long been a Republican stronghold, a kind of changing area. Like I said, Kansas City. I would say very different personalities, but they've become close, and they're very, very, very meaningful to that community. I look at Lauren Underwood. She's from the Chicago suburbs. Okay, she was the first African American, the first and the youngest person to ever win that district. And that's a district that I might add is about 98% white. Interesting to visit with her there, and she grew up in that area in Naperville, Illinois. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, as you mentioned, youngest female to serve, and then Donna Shillelagh, oldest female freshman in the House of Representatives. That doesn't get talked about a lot. That's a completely different dynamic. Someone who was a cabinet secretary who's now a freshman House member. Tons of these women, too, are either the first female in their district or the first person of color in the district. So a lot of firsts. And in some ways, women who the other group of women that I like to look at are these national security women. You afflicted Abigail Spanberger. There's a lot of women with strong, veterans and national security backgrounds that are not the first people with those backgrounds to serve, but among them, some of them, the first women with those backgrounds to serve. So it's really runs a gamut here.
Could they have done this if they weren't all so unique? And that brings to mind the word star. Because that's what happened. Remember in the very beginning after they were elected and, the 4 of them, Ocasio-Cortez and Tlaib and they came in with a bang, but they were stars. Do you have to be a star today to break through? Is that the era of Trump, or is that what his legacy is going to be? Be different, be bigger than life, be bold, be what? Or maybe not. Maybe it doesn't matter. It's just interesting to me. They all are unique.
Well, they feel like stars now. I mean, don't forget, no one gave the time of day to Ocasio-Cortez because no one thought she was going to win in what was, albeit, a pretty low turnout primary in New York City. But she took on a long-term incumbent, Joe Crowley. People thought he was on the short list to one day be Speaker of the House. And he even kind of didn't really take her as seriously, or certainly publicly he did not. So when she won that race, that was a big surprise. I wouldn't say she was a star at that time. She kind of built herself into that very quickly with a new kind of politicking and reaching out to voters and to supporters, which was through social media. So she kind of created that star power for herself, if you will, by communicating in a very different way. And then, the women that you mentioned, the ones we often refer to as the squad, Tlaib and Omar, and we didn't talk about Ayanna Pressley from Boston. Part of what made them stars, if you will, part of what certainly made them really big public figures is because the president attacked them, right, by name, and go back to where you came from. And they really became in his crosshairs. And so that really raised their profile nationally. I've seen a lot of research that shows Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, for Republicans, they use her image now more than they do for Nancy Pelosi to represent the Democratic Party. Now, a lot of women that won were not known at all outside their community, and some not even so much within their community. But they did do something that you didn't use this word, but you're kind of getting at, which is not stars as per se, but they were very, very, very authentically themselves. And I think that women historically have shied away from that because they have this kind of cookie cutter mode in their brain of what a woman in power, what a woman in political power looks like. She wears a suit. She has this very specific way of talking in public. She brings her kids out for the campaign, but then not when she's governing. It's very obviously, it's the third rail to cry. You don't show emotion. All these, almost like a role that you play. And I think a lot of these women really were very much themselves, whether they were single moms. I've seen a lot of these women cry plenty of times when talking about public policy, especially if it's something that they relate to personally. You mentioned we're going to talk about Katie Porter, which I would love to. You know, she had domestic violence in her history. I've seen her stand at a press conference. She's a pretty tough lady, too, and kind of crying as she's talking about this issue. I think that when you think about these women, of how they might have run 10 years ago would have been different. And now they're really willing to just be themselves, and to be openly gay, to be openly single moms, and to be openly talking about an impoverished background, which women were discouraged, you know, most candidates from talking about years ago, believe it or not. And so I think voters really do, that's appealing to them. And you mentioned Donald Trump, and is he the catalyst for this? He is in the sense that when you ask people why they like Donald Trump, even when there's aspects that his supporters, even when there's things they say they don't like, they like this idea that they always say he tells it like it is. There's a realness to him. You can argue whether that's actually authentic at all, but they see it that way. I think, and increasingly, no matter what sort of party you belong to or where you are in the spectrum, people do want that authenticity from their leaders. That just seems to really show up in the polls.
I think you hit the nail on the head, and you said it far better than I did, for sure. But that's where I was going too. And I do think there is, that we are all crying right now for real. You know, what's real, that becomes something different, you know, obviously from perspective, but nevertheless, I think that is why they're so fascinating. These women, let's talk Katie Porter for a minute. I love this woman. I absolutely find her I just stare at her when she starts to talk. She's smart. She's savvy. She's real. She's what we have to fix this shit. I'm going to say on air, Katie Porter. Yeah, God bless. I mean, you know, but let me go someplace quickly in another direction. So here they are, right? When you're doing the story and you're talking to all of them, what are they saying about the men and particularly Republican men's response to them? Are they still hating them for using their bathrooms? I mean, did you get into that with them?
Well, when it comes to, and this was really surprising to a lot of the freshmen, and it was always kind of fun for me and interesting to learn from them what they found surprising or difficult to navigate in Congress, because I'd covered it a long time, and so it was really interesting to hear the kinds of their fresh perspective on things. One thing that surprised all of them is very true, is they thought that they were going to interact across the aisle a lot more. But the way that things work is, when you're voting and in committee hearings, you're with members from both parties. But everything else you're doing, you're mostly interacting with colleagues of your same party. So they didn't get to know that Republicans that well outside the committee process, even those who were interested in kind of trying to form bipartisan coalitions, particularly among the veterans and the national service people. You saw that a lot. So I think two things. One is, to the extent that women complained about the things they found in Congress, a little bit men and, it's kind of some going back to the sort of gross old school ways, but more, what they complained about more, really honestly, was generational conflict. And it was somewhat older versus younger, but it was more that senior members, and of course many of them are certainly older, and the freshmen who felt like, hey, we're not just regular old freshmen. We're a large class. We won against the odds in many of our districts, doing things our own way, and we want to have a bigger say. We really chafe at the sort of very traditional hidebound seniority that drives the House of Representatives and Congress generally. They couldn't stand that. I mean, in Washington's that way. You get points in this town just kind of for sticking around, And these people were saying, hey, we come from these really very diverse and very impressive professional backgrounds, and we won these really tough races. We want kind of put a finger on the scale on how things are done around here. So I think that was a bigger conflict than men. I will say some of the more senior women did tell me, Democrats, that in the beginning, when, of course, the entire party was excited to have the gavel back in the House, and they were, invigorated with these freshmen and all these new women, but they got pretty tired of it, a lot of the men, pretty quickly. And a lot of the men, one of the members told me, was saying, I'm getting tired of hearing about all these women all the time. So, even among so-called progressive men, they get sometimes a little annoyed of having to actually share the stage and share power with women. And by the way, Congress is a place where people don't like to share the stage anyway.
Right.
There's more petty fighting about, whose name goes first and who stands where, and, standing up in order of seniority than you would ever imagine. So that's kind of more, I think, where some of the tensions formed.
Let me take you here also. They came in like Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, riding on the enormous thermals of a cyclone. That's before they landed in front of the power of Nancy Pelosi. So the so-called squad, were they tamed? What's the background on their silencing themselves to some degree, or her having silenced them? I'm not sure. Where are we on that? Because they're playing by the rules a little better these days.
Yeah, I always like to take the opportunity to do a little correction on the squad, which is to say they operate more independently than people seem to realize. They probably work less on legislation and vote in the exact same way together than the national security women do. And by the way, with the men too, that national security team is a real squad, a real force. They have this group text. They talk all the time on how they're going to vote and legislation and things they're going to do together. So the squad, those women kind of really are independent from one another, and they kind of go their own way. And while they certainly support each other, they are not a monolith as people think, especially vis-a-vis Nancy Pelosi. Ayanna Pressley, who was in the Boston City Council for many years, is kind of more of, I would say, like an inside type player. With respect to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, where she got in hot water, and her staff originally, was in two ways. One, she came in having beaten a Democratic incumbent and kind of suggested right out of the box that more Democrats needed to be challenged and picked off. And that didn't make her very popular with her colleagues or the leadership. And her staff would pick on members about their votes. And this was a big tension, and this kind of presaged what you saw in the 2020 stage for the race for the White House, where you had a tension between the real progressives who want to move the party in a specific direction and believe that that's the future of the party, and the moderates who said, hey, we won Republican districts. We're only in the majority because we won those districts, and we have to, serve the constituents of a much more conservative district than you have, with very different types of needs and very different viewpoints. And we have to, we don't have enough Democrats in our district just to win with liberal Democrats. We need to appeal to independents or Republicans and so forth. That's how we won. So they had that tension as well. And when her staff would attack colleagues on their votes for more, modified legislation than the progressive would have cared for, that really made Nancy Pelosi mad. She didn't like members fighting with each other or perceiving that people were picking fights with them, particularly their staff. And so she did two things I think are really interesting. She got rid of her chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarti, who was really kind of poking at members in ways that's just really sort of not seen in Congress. And another thing I thought was really interesting is that she supported far, far fewer challengers this year. I think there were only two so far to her colleagues. So to me, both of those things signaled that she is interested in playing nicely with her colleagues and trying to work within the institution a little bit more, and work on coalitions. So I don't know so much if that's Nancy Pelosi taming her. I think, to be honest, Nancy Pelosi has had to manage over the years such disparate groups in her caucus. Super liberal, much more conservative in some ways than it exists now. You don't have any. You have one pro-life Democrat in the House, and he just got beaten in the primary. So, she had to deal with people with very different views on social issues that are not necessarily true anymore. She knows how to manage broad personalities and a broad range of people on the political spectrum. I think what Nancy Pelosi wanted is for these women who had a lot, as you pointed out, were stars, right? They had a lot of political power, which is not the same as legislative power, but they had a really high political profile. And I think she wanted them to use their power to lift up the institution and their colleagues too. That's not always how it works, but I think that's what she was craving, and I think that's where she would get frustrated.
I have a couple of more questions very quickly. One, everybody comes to Congress with good intentions. On a scale of, after talking to a lot of these women, do they still have good intentions? Do they feel like, this is a weird walk I'm in, and it's, you can have the best of intentions, but here's reality. Where are these women? Are they going to run again? Are they happy?
I mean, everyone's running again. And I think happiness is definitely, varies across the board. I think a lot of them feel a lot of frustration, but I still, to answer your question, yes. Do I think their intentions are as they set out? Yes. Is their ability to fulfill what they imagined necessarily matching up? No. But that's true with everybody who comes to Congress. They never seem to understand it's a big place with a lot of people. It's not the executive branch.
Yeah.
It's not being a mayor. It's not being in the DOD. It's hard.
You raised the point that, and I thought this was brilliant on your part, I think the book is brilliant, but it's interesting that you come to the conclusion in the first that the increase in the number of women in Congress was symbolically important. But after you're following these women's first tumultuous year, you came to believe that the Congresswomen's diversity could be even more transformative than their gender alone. That's extraordinary.
That was my observation, and without putting, my personal views, obviously, or finger on the scale about the nature of or the worth of the things that they were bringing up. The bottom line is, Ilhan Omar got into a lot of scraps with her colleagues over issues surrounding Israel and was perceived to be anti-Semitic by many, and there actually had to be a whole congressional resolution because of her remarks. But the bottom line is, no matter how you feel about that issue, that was a different way to talk about Israel in the halls of Congress. That just wasn't happening before. There were two Muslim women, even though there were Muslim men, until there were two Muslim women, and one of them, with Palestinian background. Rashida Tlaib's grandmother still lives there. So that's just different. I think talking openly and frequently and having a Black maternal health caucus, when you know how Black maternal death is so outrageously high in this country, making that a priority and legislating around that is something that you just probably wouldn't have seen if you didn't have of these women. The way they've taken the oversight committee and talked about things like childhood trauma and things, I just think that they've changed a way we talk about a lot of different issues, and they've surfaced and elevated a lot of things in committees that may not have happened without them. And they're doing that again as freshmen. And so that's why I think those are not necessarily things that have to do with being a female member, although people can talk to you about why they think being, having a lot of women in Congress is important. But those things really stem from having a diverse group of people, women mostly, from all across the country, again, race, religious backgrounds, professional backgrounds. That diversity, I think, has made the most impact on the way they are perceived and probably what's happening even on the micro level in the halls of Congress.
I'm going to end here. Sexual harassment is ever in the news these days, and here we are. We've got new allegations against the presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party, Joe Biden. And all of this comes out of these women, really, in a way, because this is what changed it with the Me Too movement and Al Franken. And I'll throw out very quickly that I think Kirsten Gillibrand probably didn't get anywhere in her, bid for the nomination because of her stance on with Al Franken. Talk to me about that very quickly as we go back. What about that?
Congress, like every workplace, was not immune from sexual harassment. And in fact, one of the first things this Congress did was really codify some things that seemed to be, common sense rules around that. And I think it's very interesting, and there was a lot of controversy around this, obviously, a lot of discussion, a lot of painful ones, about the fact that the first person in this class to fall around those issues was actually a female member, one of the freshmen, who in fact was Katie Hill was high profile, and she was a pet of Nancy Pelosi's and really seemed to be someone who was going to go far in politics. So that's a very interesting twist on the dynamic. But, I would say that obviously women in power and legislative power have a lot of ability to elevate that issue. And as you point out, Kirsten Gillibrand basically is almost single-handedly in some ways, certainly it was catalyst to bring down Al Franken. But I guess I would just argue that we should be cautious as to not see that as the only or certainly even the principal role of women in Congress, because that's something that our culture has to deal with writ large. And women in Congress, I think we're looking to them first and foremost, their very existence, the fact that young women can go into the House gallery and look out on the floor and see all these women there and can imagine the possible for themselves, especially girls from, backgrounds like Sharice Davids, who went to community college and they never could imagine themselves in her shoes. I think that is probably the most important work they're doing, just their presence alone. And I hope that we can just kind of think about that a lot.
The book ends with a great image, this freedom, this sculpture that's at the top of the Capitol. I'm not going to go into that, but guys, you got to pick this book up because this is really poetic. It's poetic.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, you can go to bookshop.org right now. They are really supporting independent bookstores. They're doing a great job of getting books to people's homes right now when people can't get to bookstores and helping really independent bookstores survive. So bookshop.org, you can get my book and any book that you're interested in that's coming out right now. There's a ton of them.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Terrific. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Okay. Bye-bye. I've been speaking with Jennifer Steinhauer. Her book is The Inside Story of the Women Reshaping Congress. It's informative, it's engaging, it's a must-read. For more information, visit Jennifer@jennifersteinhauer.com. Thank you for tuning in to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of RESEC LLC. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, and is available at HalliCasser-Jayne.com and on all your favorite apps. Be sure to visit us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and follow me on Twitter at The Halli CJ Show. Until next time, this is Halli Casser-Jayne.